Hey, Composing Gloves here. I'm wearing a hat, and today we are going to be going over the 3 oscillators inside of Monark. So let's go ahead and hop into this. I'm assuming you know what oscillators are from the Sound and Synth Basic series. So we're going to go ahead and move forward. Now with oscillators, of course, we have a range, so our octave selection. We have our pitch controls. So this is like the range of octave. This is a more exact pitch control, so you can do detuning and stuff. And then you also have waveforms. And of these waveforms, 1 and 2 match, 3 is a little bit different. So let's go ahead and go over that first. So the waveforms are the most important building block in oscillators, and you kind of want to be familiar with how they sound as a starting point as you get deeper and deeper into synthesis. So our first one is a triangle wave. And then we go on to this mix between a triangle wave and a saw wave, which is not available on 3. 3 actually has a different deal. And then we move up to the saw wave. One thing that's kind of an interesting experiment, if you want to go ahead and try it, is open up just like a ton of plugins and then see what their saw waves sound like. And you'd be surprised. They almost always sound very different. So, okay, even though they're all saw waves, they sound like very different saw waves. Next up, we have our square wave. And the reason is just the methods they use to generate them and what they base their method of generation on. And then we have 2 pulse widths, so just shorter pulses than the square wave. And then our final one. Pretty cool. And then, okay, so that's that. Now over here on oscillator 2, we've got the same deal. On oscillator 3, we actually have an inverted saw wave, right? So here's like the regular saw wave on the other ones. Here's an inverted saw wave. You might be going, what is an inverted saw wave good for? And it's good for pulse width modulation. I believe that's why they included it, and because that's what they specifically reference it to in their manual. There's a couple other properties I suppose you could get out of this. But if you want to know about pulse width modulation, I actually included that video in the FM series, but I used Monark as the example of how to achieve pulse width modulation using this method and also using the frequency modulation method. So I'll put a link to that in the description, and I may even include it in this series. I don't know yet, because you do have to know FM synthesis to do this. But I explain my reasoning as we go. So if you're curious about pulse width modulation, you can check out that video. But that's one of the reasons why this exists here. And so pretty cool. And I'm in the low range versus. So it's like, oh, what's that for? But again, it has properties when you begin combining them with other things. So, all right, cool. So that's the waveforms. Now let's move over here to the frequency. Now, just something. Okay, so we have this modulation. We'll come back to that. Actually, we'll just cover it right now. So you can turn on and off modulation. It allows you to modulate the frequency of oscillators 1 and 2 by oscillator 3. And we've already talked about the modulation mix knob down here. So if we set it to oscillator and move it up, of course, it will begin to modulate the pitch or the frequency of oscillators 1 and 2. So if we turn this off, turn that on. And right now it's been set to be a saw wave. So let's go ahead and make a triangle wave. And there you go. There you have it. Man, I guess this is also particularly useful on the LFO one for that reason right there. So I don't know. Maybe that's just another good use for it. Okay, cool. So that is the modulation. Just allows you to basically just do some frequency modulation. Next up, we have our fine pitch controls. So we can adjust the pitch of an oscillator simply by moving this up and down. Very, very useful for detuning things slightly. So if we had 1 and 2 going out and they were the same, we could detune one slightly. And you get that sort of a thing. And the farther you detune, the less it's like that. Or the farther you detune, the less it's like that. The crazier it tends to get. You can find interesting ratios, things that work like 1 to 3. There are a lot of classic sounds based on ratios sort of like that. Okay, so that is the fine pitch. Just allows you to change the pitch specifically. You might be going, seems very similar to the fine pitch knob, but if you pay attention to the fine pitch knob, this is 7 semitones, while this one is 7.5. So they give you an extra 0.5. I don't know the reasoning behind this. Maybe there was a technical reason, or maybe they just felt like being generous. But that is the difference. Kind of weird. And also the 5 is like faded off here. I don't know if I mentioned that in this video, but that's strange to me. The 5's It's just the fives are freaking me out, man. Okay, so that's that. I mean, it's not that complicated. And then we'll cover this. Well, we'll cover the key tracking now. So we see here that we can adjust our fine pitch here. And with this off, what does that mean? Well, if we were to turn this on and listen to it, we see it's right now it's in low, so we can turn it to 32. But whatever key I hit, it's not going to play that note. It's going to just emit that octave at this particular pitch offset. And so I'd have to actually change this. So that allows us to set, when we're modulating things, this can be very useful if we find a particular thing that we really like and we want it to remain consistent. However, they add an extra functionality, of course, because they want you to be able to use this oscillator if you desire. So you can also set key tracking on. And what that means is it will actually play the note you're hitting on your keyboard. So we could play it like a regular oscillator and use it. And we can even get crazy and have it like do things as a modulating source. Maybe have it control the frequency as well. And maybe take this down because... And that says send something out. So you can hear that it's working even though it's emitting too. But sometimes this can be useful for all sorts of weird modulations. But anyways, that's all the key tracking does. You have to consider a lot of relationships because now they're like moving. It's a lot easier to just look at static things. So I tend to use this for like one purpose. I don't try to ever get back to oscillator 3. I haven't like attempted to anyways. I'm not even sure if you can. And then our last setting here is the range setting. And on the range setting, we have our possible octaves for each individual oscillator. So if we want oscillator 1 to be at the octave equivalent to 8, then we can do that, which we have to turn it on, of course. And this is nice because now if we turn on 2 and have it at 16, they're an octave apart rather than, because you can't do that if you change the global knob, obviously. But you can maintain the relationship between them, which is cool. So that's pretty cool. You might be going, what's the deal with these lengths? They're based on organ stops. So that's why. I don't know why they couldn't just put like octave 0, 1, 2. And so that is the oscillator section of Monark. If you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe. Pretty straightforward stuff. And have a blessed day.